morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll do a slight change in the agenda. On behalf of the Caribbean Shipping Association and WiMAC, we thank you for joining us in this new project. First of all, we would like to thank you on behalf of the Caribbean Shipping Association, WiMAC, for reaching out to the CSA and working on this project. The idea is to create collaboration and to create a roadmap for recovery regarding the pandemic. The CSA and WiMAC have a long history together, and we think that this kind of partnership of working on joint projects like this is a blueprint for the kind of collaboration needed in our region. As the theme of our webinar, creating a regional ecosystem response leads to. We believe that this collaboration is needed between regulatory bodies, both international and local, shipping companies, port authorities and port operators, NGOs, beneficial cargo owners, academic institutions, and trade associations. We also believe that partnerships need to get out of the MOUs and papers and into the real world, exactly like this new webinar series is doing. The challenges ahead for our region in general and our industry in particular are very big, not only in terms of the pandemic and the health and economic crisis, but also decarbonization and automation. We'll have to tackle these challenges later on. And we believe that only together as a region, we can overcome these challenges. So the match is set. Together, we can overcome these challenges. Last but not least, before going out, I would like to thank Jan Hoffman and wish him a very happy birthday. We put together all this webinar only because of you. You're a good friend to the Caribbean region, and we thank you for taking the time in your birthday to join us. So thank you very much, and welcome everybody again.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I was actually waiting for us to build up a bit more of an audience, but I recognize and thank those of us who have joined us on time. Good morning to all colleagues in Maritime in the Caribbean and beyond, and my name is Dwinette Eversley. I'm president of the Women in Maritime Association, one of several WiMAs across the globe that have been established under the auspices of IMO's Women in Maritime program. So welcome to our webinar series. The series that we have is one important incarnation of a CSA WiMAC partnership that was forged last year. As most of you know, the Caribbean Shipping Association has been in the regional landscape for decades with all the appurtenances of a regional big brother leader. WiMAC, little sister in this analogy, originated only in 2015. And we have a mantle to promote the growth of the sector and the equal access and participation of women towards that end. Some of you would argue that we assumed, or rather were conferred, the traditional irritations of a little sister. But increasingly, we are finding a committed team of male allies and champions who offer space for dialogue and action. And CSA's President Juan Carlos Croston is such an ally. He advised me to roll my R's, if you're wondering. And he fully grasps the importance of a gender mainstreaming narrative to our agency's mutual vision of Caribbean economies optimizing the full potential of the maritime sector. So we thank you for that support, JC, and look forward to the long journey ahead. I want to especially welcome the expert team of thought leaders and subject area specialists that are adding flesh and passion to today's discussion on the facilitation of trade and transport as a critical component in Caribbean maritime sustainability. Colleagues, all do enjoy the session. I invite you all to be very generous in offering your own perspectives to the agenda setting we are seeking to influence. Thank you.
We hand over to you, Jennifer.
Good morning. What a beautiful day it is to be somewhere in the world, and I am absolutely wonderfully amazed at the incredible talent and brilliance of the thought leaders that are going to be sharing their thoughts with us with regards to the topic at hand, which is Caribbean shipping post-COVID-19, a roadmap to recovery and sustainability. And because we're all speaking about and focus on one area, that of the Caribbean, I am really excited about what we're going to be hearing from our partners today as we dive deep into this discussion and very quickly. Now, I will say that one of the things that I did as we were preparing for this is do a quick Zoom scale training for how do you make a Zoom meeting exciting and fun? And I said, do it in the Caribbean. Focus on the Caribbean. There is no other place. But then I remember Yan he's way over on the other side of the world. And when he begins to speak, he will tell us where he is. But the beauty of this conversation that we're having today is really to talk about how do we make the Caribbean resilient? How do we ensure that the capacity to keep moving goods and trade and do it as efficiently, using technology, and how best we can make this beautiful place that we call home, whether we're in Trinidad, where our co-chair Joanne Edwards is this morning, or whether you're in the beautiful island of the Caymans, where our other co-chair, Attorney Sharice Arman, who's been such a gracious partner for all of us. And so I know that as we begin to hear from our speakers, they'll tell you, where in the world are they? That's a quick icebreaker. Where in the world are they? And just imagine yourselves that you're in a beautiful space in the Caribbean. I want to share with you just a few things as we move right into our discussion. We have an hour and a half together this morning on this webinar, and it's one of the series in which Women in Maritime Administration Caribbean that our president, Lynette Eversley, just mentioned to you. But I want you to listen for certain words, and I know we have over 100 persons registered to participate in the webinar this morning, but I want you to listen to words like recovery, blue economy, transformational, digitization. I want you to also pay attention to the word foreign exchange, the economies of the Caribbean. And then I want you to listen to how we can become adept at adapting, pivoting, because if it's one thing that I know about the Caribbean, is that we have seen our share of all kinds of natural disasters. We've also seen some economic implication, but we've learned to be resilient. We have managed to come back, some faster than others, some stronger than the others, but collectively, I think after this discussion, we want to talk about a consensus building going forward for how we can sustain our trade, our shipping, and the ability to make the Caribbean exactly what it is for us, a wonderful place to live, to raise our families, to work, and to have the best life that we can. So for me, as we introduce our first panelists this morning, I want you to think about the word resilience, and I'm going to choose the definition this morning, and there are many other ways that we can define resilience. But for us in this conversation, resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from challenges, difficulties, and in this conversation, a pandemic that has caused us to really rethink our ways, come up with ideas, do better, build back better, or hopefully create a consensus for us to do this. There will be a poll throughout our discussion this morning, really as it relates to ideas after you've heard some of our conversation that you think we ought to be thinking about for the next series of webinars that WiMAC will produce. So I am really honored this morning, really intrigued by our first presenter this morning. Her topic is going to be about a high-level policy and what we are really hoping for an enabling environment for sustainable maritime trade, transport, and the blue economy. Senator, the Honorable Lisa Cummins from the government of Barbados, who has been deputized by Prime Minister Mia Mottley to represent her country this morning on her behalf. And the Honorable Senator is also the chair of the Barbados Port Authority. Senator Lisa Cummins, I am truly honored to be a part of this conversation with you. Welcome, and we invite you to make your opening remarks and to share with us your thoughts. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the Caribbean Shipping Association and to the Women in Maritime. You have been an amazing group. I first interacted with some of your members last year at Sea Trade in Miami. And I see one or two of your members. I see the representative from Dominica who also started a new chapter there. So I'm very happy to see Tamara Lowe and others online. So you're doing an amazing job. And this is very much an important initiative that is being undertaken in collaboration with the CSA. And I see the colleagues also from Geneva, from UNCTAD, Yan, and others. So thank you for inviting Barbados. I'm here. I don't know if there's any possibility of me deputizing for Prime Minister Mottley, but I will represent Barbados in the best way that I can. So let's start first by having a look at some of the challenges that we're talking about. What exactly are we talking about when we say the road to recovery and sustainability? What are we talking about when we start to look at the blue economy, maritime transportation? What are we talking about when we look at the challenges that are being faced by ports all across the region and right here in Barbados, of course, in what is now known as the new normal, the post-COVID environment. But in order to do that, perhaps it may be important for us to start with what existed before COVID, and then we can go into where we are now. So prior to COVID, we had Caribbean growth estimated by most agencies at approximately 1.8%. And we've seen that COVID has erased most of those gains. We're expecting to see declines somewhere in the vicinity of 3%. That's going to require a policy response from governments across the region. We've seen the maritime sector. Now, anyone who's been following the Caribbean countries, certainly at the level of the United Nations, the Association of Caribbean States, we do know that the maritime economy has been a major plank of what we have been working on in terms of building recognition along with the Pacific nations and so on about the importance of maritime development in the Caribbean countries and to our economy. That has accounted for about 3.9% of GDP and was expected to be growing. We're expecting to see many of those gains erased. What will be the policy response that we are looking for? In terms of tourism, one of the key subsectors within the blue economy, tourism, travel, and trade. Obviously, we're talking about the cruise industry. Certainly across the region, we were seeing record numbers being accumulated by most countries across the region. Here in Barbados, we were exceeding even the targets that we had anticipated when COVID struck somewhere in March. And as we were getting towards the close of the season, we were already in excess of what we expected to see when the season closed. But we're looking now not even at a resumption of the cruise sector in November when the season is meant to begin, but we're looking possibly more towards 2021. What is the policy response that we're looking at there? And then of course, there's the all-important question of cargo trade. We're moving goods, we're largely net importing countries. Most of what we consume, certainly in terms of consumables, they are being imported into the country, and you're seeing disruptions in the supply and the value chains globally and therefore regionally. What are the policy responses that are required? And in order to be able to start those conversations, I think we needed to have that contextualization first, where we were, the importance to our economies, the relevance of employment to those sectors, how we're going to be treating to the people who constitute those sectors, and then moving forward. So let's start first of all with the questions surrounding maritime transportation. So maritime transportation has been a significant challenge for most countries around the world. It has been critical to see supply chains remaining open. And as countries have closed down on their, we've seen lockdowns, most cargo ports have remained open for goods. but we've seen a number of challenges. What we've seen is that had incidences of declining cargo volumes as businesses remain closed, and you're seeing less container traffic moving through. And that has also been impacted by dampened consumer demand. But from a trade perspective, and I can't not speak from a trade perspective because my own background is in trade, and my training at the master's level is in international trade policy, so I can't avoid that. We've seen a number of restrictions, in particular export restrictions, affecting cargo trade and movement of cargo across the country. And one of the recommendations at a policy level that we would have to make is that across the Caribbean countries, in the same way that now from a tourism perspective, which is one of the policy responses, that we're going to be seeing the travel bubble emerging where we have uniformity of policy across the region, there has to be a conversation across the region about uniformity in treatment of the movement of cargo across the region. We've seen so many challenges being presented by the shipping lines on the one hand and by importers on the other hand as a result of restrictions that have been put in place. Then there have been the public health challenges that have been presented as a result of those export restrictions. So you saw countries holding on to exports that were needed for their critical needs domestically, and that affected us globally. What does that mean for the Caribbean? Then we also have challenges that are specific to the tourism sector. And I would love to, if I've shared my screen, I would be able to share with you that 10 years ago, the Caribbean was the #1 region in the world globally for the deployment of cruise ships anywhere in the world. #1 of 5 regions in the world where cruise ships were deployed. As at 2019, the cruise industry diversified where it was deploying vessels, and we had around 11 regions in the world where cruise ships were deployed, but the Caribbean remained #1. What does that mean for our conversations on diversification of the tourism sector in order to treat to the questions of resilience and sustainability? And one of the policy responses there has to be, is it that we need to diversify away from tourism, or is it that we need to diversify within the tourism sector? Because the tourism sector becomes so critical to employment, to revenue generation, you mentioned foreign exchange generation, to all of the Caribbean countries, and we have remained #1 in the world historically and even in a contemporary context. When you talk about with the cruise lines now, the cruise lines are talking about redeploying vessels starting with the Caribbean first. And so we have to have this conversation about diversifying in order to speak to the question of resilience and sustainability in our tourism sector. And it's interesting to say this. I have seen my friends and my colleagues in different regions around the world. I've heard my Nigerian colleagues say, oh, we need to diversify away from oil. I've heard many of my agrarian-based colleagues say, we need to diversify away from agriculture. So a policy response has to speak to what does diversification mean for different countries and in different sectors, including in subsectors. And one of the key things for the Caribbean has to be maintaining our base and our strength in the tourism industry and all of the other sectors that it supports, but diversifying and bringing in new tourism-based products to the world that differentiates us from every other tourism product. That's one of the things that I think we want to have a conversation about. The other element that I wanted to raise here as well is specific to the blue economy. We have seen a number of controls and procedures implemented in terms of borders and clearances in our ports. And if I can give a brief example of the Barbados port, we implemented Assecuda World in 2019 in September, and we moved towards that digitization that you've been talking about relatively steadily. COVID, for all of that it was negative, created a number of significant opportunities for us, things that were thought to be impossible before. So pre-shipment inspection, pre-shipment clearance, that 24-hour notification, all of those things became easy to do because people no longer were able to go out, but cargo still had to move. So digitization is a critical component of the conversation that has created opportunities for us. And the policy response from most of us, certainly for Barbados, has to be that we're not going back. We're not going back to where we were. We can't go back to this manual procedures again. We can't go back to the delays. We now are at the stage where we have set a target for ourselves. We meet every Friday afternoon at 2 p.m. in a team with all of the agencies, and we have targets that no cargo must stay in our port beyond 72 hours unless it hits the attention of management, because these clearance procedures have now been digitized. And digitization becomes a critical component. We're now moving to implement the electronic single window and the port community system, because those are important policy interventions that will help to drive the agenda. And the final point that I want to make is a people point, and I think it's one of the most important things that Barbados has discovered over the last few months. As ports closed, as countries closed, as borders shut down, Barbados remained open. Barbados remained open because we have a leader who insists that people must come first and people matter. And I know that in our prep meeting yesterday, we were talking about seafarers and so on. Barbados has remained open to seafarers from the beginning of COVID until now. And between February until today, over 20,000 crew members from cruise ships have been repatriated through Barbados. And that's not cargo ships as well. That's just cruise ships. And we have been committed to ensuring that people are able to be seen as essential workers, as frontline workers, and to be repatriated safely to their homes. And the policy response that we would want to recommend there is that we do have that conversation about having the workforce on ships and the workforce in our ports, workforce on the front line of our trade agenda, certainly our maritime transportation workforce, seen as essential and frontline workers who are able to go home under safe conditions, who we're able to keep safe, and who we are able to facilitate for the reunion back with their families in their respective homes. And so those are some of the key things that we have experienced, that we've seen over the last few months. And one last thought that I would want to leave with you here is that I don't know if I think that the Caribbean fully grasps that the world has changed. We went into emergency mode. We treated with a lot of the scenarios that were presented to us because we were in emergency mode. But I think that what is going to give us that competitive edge, what is going to give us that sustainability, what is going to give us that resilience, is for us to move forward in a new disruptive environment where we don't go back to those previous work practices or those previous work structures or those models that necessarily were in place prior to COVID, but we embrace the changes that we made during COVID and move even further into full transformation of our economies, of our sectors, of our businesses, and of our policy institutions, so that we're able to be competitive in a global world that has changed irrevocably. And that would be my summary.
I am so thankful. Thank you very much, Senator Cummins. You have really, I think, set the tone for this conversation as we go forward. And I also want to advise our audience, we do have Q&A. We're managing and monitoring the questions. We're going to hold our questions for each of our panelists till all our speakers or presenters have shared their thoughts. But thank you very much. And in fact, I believe what Senator Cummins just did is to really give us a great segue into our next speaker. And as she unmute her mic, it is indeed an honor again for me to be in the presence virtually of a great woman from the Caribbean, the great leader, Ms. Diane Corliss, who is the chief of the UN ECLAC sub-regional headquarters for the Caribbean. We had the privilege of hearing an amazing conversation with regards to economic impact and considerations that we must think about in the region. And I welcome her again to share her insights with us this morning as it relates to this topic at hand. Welcome to you so much, so grateful to have you with us, Diane. Thank you. And I turn over the mic to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Such a pleasure to be here. I have the highest respect for WiMAC and the Caribbean Shipping Association. I feel very privileged to have been invited to join you again today. Many happy returns to Jan, and greetings to all my colleagues and to all participants. I'd like to share my screen because my presentation follows on very okay.
Thank you.
How do we do this now? You should
Go to
say
slideshow.
From the beginning. Right. So my my presentation complements that which has just been presented by Senator Cummings, because I have been asked to speak to the broad economic impacts and considerations for the Caribbean in the post-COVID scenario. And I very much appreciated the way in which she contextualized it with the policy responses that the region will need to consider. My presentation speaks to the broader challenges in which I include the concerns for the shipping community. But this is an effort really to give you the backdrop, the wider scenario that the Caribbean faces, that our leaders, the considerations that the leaders have to take on board when responding to this unprecedented challenge. And I want to start, of course, with the issue of tourism, which Senator Cummings also mentioned. But I'm giving you from the hard, cold facts. What we did in our office was a modeling. We did economic modeling with a base scenario, a positive scenario, and a pessimistic scenario. And we estimate that we will lose between 22 and 28 billion dollars, and I have the information here by country, but the losses to our region in 2020 alone will be between 22 and 28 billion in tourism, representing as much as 75% of the regular income to be earned in this industry. And this impacts not just the direct, well, the industry as a whole, including the backward and forward linkages. So we're talking about restaurants and the agricultural industry that provides resources to the hotels and so on. Wide economic impact across our countries as a result of the virtual shutdown of the tourism industry. And so the question of policy responses that speak to a diversification of tourism in the region, if we are to still remain tourism dependent economies, how then do we make tourism resilient? Because this is a challenge that our countries are now facing. The majority of the region is tourism dependent, and COVID has shut these industries down. We're looking at, as had been indicated, cruise ships. The cruise line, its services have been eviscerated. 74% of all revenue in the last 6 months, representing $600 million, evaporated in the cruise system. And we are all aware, at the end of June, a decision was taken in the region to liquidate LIAT. 92% disruption in the airline industry. This also, of course, linked to the challenges that are being faced in the wider industry, tourism industry. I look at transportation in respect of commercial shipping, also significantly affected, but not as badly as the tourist travel, but commercial shipping. Freight rates have fallen to 99%. They've had a 99% reduction in freight rates during 2020, and this has very serious implications for income. Low line of connectivity also has been exacerbated in this post-COVID period, and so the impact is both direct and indirect, as has been indicated. We're talking about furloughing staff, retrenching workers on the ports, a slowing of cargo clearance because of the requirements for social distancing and so on. So there has been significant impact also on the on commercial shipping. We have not been able to get very specific information for the Caribbean, which is why I'm unable to give you very specific details here. But the impact on the region as a whole is quite significant. We can't plan for the year without taking on board our vulnerability to climate change. Yes. We're expecting an unusually active season in 2020. They're saying that we were going to have at least 16 named storms, and we know that these days our storms are category 5. We know that Hurricane Dorian brought 3.4 billion in losses to the Bahamas alone last year. 3.4 billion. So in the face of the retrenchment and the contraction of economic production in the region, we are bracing for the possibility of additional losses through the impact of climate change this year. So the combination then of the stalling of our economies and the ongoing impact of our vulnerability, we are exposed. We are exposed to external exogenous factors. We're still recovering from the international financial crisis of 10 years ago. You see the orange line in the left graph. The first dip you see there was the financial crisis of 2009, and we crawled our way out of that, and now we're anticipating taking another dip. And so we're talking about growth negative, and this has therefore continued to increase the debt of the region, and the total public debt of the region is in excess of 58 billion. The graph on the right shows that there are 11 of our 14 countries that have a debt to GDP ratio in excess of 60%, which is deemed by the IMF to be the level of sustainability. If you have a debt to GDP ratio, that is the amount of debt compared to the amount of that you earn, then your ability to stay afloat, is seriously challenged. So the majority of the Caribbean is shouldering a very heavy debt, and this is not from today. This is many years coming. We're looking therefore at circumstances that, because of the responsibilities for repayment of debt, and the graph on the left shows that the debt service, this is the percentage of our income that we pay that goes just into paying our debts every year, is between 20, it's average 27. That's a third, just under a third is the average. But we have countries that are paying as much as 74.9% of their income in debt service. 3/4 of what you earn for the year is paid out in debt service. Okay, there's a funny sound. So we have a situation where our economies are heavily burdened, forced to pay the majority of our earnings.
Excuse me 1 second, Diane. Please, if you're not speaking, mute your phone, please. Mute your phone. Please mute your phones. We can hear your conversation. I apologize, Diane. Please proceed, Diane.
Thank you. So we have broadening the challenge that our countries are facing, shouldering a very heavy debt burden and a debt service that has narrowed the fiscal space. And when we say narrow the fiscal space, this speaks to the money that you have in hand to address the challenges, to stimulate investment in the economy, to pay your debts, to buy food imports and drug imports, to pay your salaries to staff. All of the expenses of government have to be identified in that narrowed fiscal space. And the resources that governments and countries get, because remittance flows are extremely important in the support that they provide to individuals, but also from the taxes that governments get from those flows. And remittances have become an extremely important aspect of income flows to our countries, and that has fallen by 100 billion. But this is a worldwide figure. I have not been able to get the very specific figure for the Caribbean, but you will appreciate that foreign investment, remittances, official development assistance, there is a dramatic reduction in net inflows to our countries at a time when we are facing increasing challenges in terms of employment and social costs that are COVID related. Here is what, in order for us to maintain, when it was necessary, the lockdown, the closing of the borders, the attrition in the tourism industry, governments have since March paid out in the Caribbean, and these are figures for the Caribbean, payroll support, 343 million. In grants to businesses to keep businesses afloat, 167 million. Unemployment benefits, and we've been really focusing on public assistance to the informal sector as well, and relief. Some countries have provided all sorts of innovative insurance and relief support to ensure that people can stay in their homes, to ensure that people have food. I remember speaking to a minister from Antigua and Barbuda. She was busily packaging food packages to provide to women in her community. So at a time when resources are sorely contracted, governments are facing additional costs. And this is the reason why there is need for concessional support. The blue line is the concessional support that the Caribbean receives. And we receive that concessional report because they say we're middle income. And we're supposed to be able to take care of ourselves. We are middle and upper income countries, but they do not factor in these exogenous factors that make us so incredibly vulnerable. So this is why the policy interventions that will assure a strengthened resilience of our region are so absolutely essential. These are some of those that we at ECLAC, there's a huge process right now being advanced by the Secretary General of the United Nations, a summit. So all of the heads of government of the UN met in middle and late May, and they have a process going now where they're actually looking at very innovative ways in which we can respond to the economic challenges that have been presented by COVID. And this process is being co-chaired by Canada and Jamaica, two countries from the Western Hemisphere, and call it, wider Americas, but also importantly, one from the Caribbean, advancing the particular concerns of the region. We have been participating in these consultations, which will culminate in a summit meeting in September. And we have a debt swap initiative, which I'm not going to go into now, but it is some of those ideas that Senator Cummings was speaking to, where we are going to invest in our debt swap. We are trying to get the creditors to allow the countries of the region to place their debt, instead of repaying their debt to the creditors, to put it in a resilience fund that allows us to invest in projects, green industry projects, blue economy projects that build the resilience of our countries from an environmental perspective, but also for a broader diversification. So we're diversifying the economies. We need to have debt standstills. It is impossible for the countries to take on any further debt, and there is going to need to be assistance in a debt standstill or debt forgiveness or debt deferral, suspension. They have many different versions of the same thing. We're also looking at what we call state contingency bonds, hurricane clauses. These are say that this is a situation in the event that we get a challenge like a Hurricane Dorian. There should be a way in which governments are able to retrench some of their of the costs that they face. The green and blue bonds, similar to the ideas that were advanced by Senator Cummings, and liquidity. This is just to help those that are seriously strapped for cash. Liquidity is perhaps one of the most urgent needs of our countries now. And this is generally the development issues that continue because, you know, life goes on. You know, post-COVID, life must go on. And these are development priorities that we need to find a way to keep on the front burner, even as we respond to COVID. And I think one of them that was really very important that was raised is the question of widening and strengthening our digital platforms, not just for business, for you guys, but for education. You know, right. Because our kids need to continue to be in school. We're looking at food security. This is an important matter also for, I think, the shipping industry, because we import 80% of the food that we eat. And therefore, we need to continue to ensure that cargo supplies strengthens food security. We also need to invest in agriculture at home to deal with this. The question of risk assessment and strengthening disaster management. I will share this PowerPoint so you have the basic information. Right. But this is the scene setting that I wanted to use as a backdrop for your discussions this morning.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. And you know, we're monitoring some of the questions and comments that are coming up, and there is one that Senator Cummings, for you to think about as when we get to our Q&A. And you know, excellent presentation. The comment says the bubble seems like a sensible approach, granted lower COVID. And then the question: how successful have our efforts at creating such a bubble and leap forward to opening our borders while others remain with their borders closed? So that's a question in response to Senator Cummings' comments. We're not going to answer that right now. There certainly we want to welcome and encourage you to put your questions out there. We are going to try and respond to all of them. The question with regards to the cruise lines must guarantee safe and healthy ships, you know, for as they enter our border. I think that what Diane has done is really, again, another great segue that takes us into hearing from one of our international partners, and someone that has really been focusing on the trade facilitation, because I think, Diane, as you set the stage for these contingency plans, including our hurricanes and going forward, the issue of debt swap, fascinating process. I think to encourage this conversation, because the maritime industry and the facilitation of when the economy reopens is best described as a critical conversation, and we're so honored to have Jan Hoffman, Chief Trade and Logistics Branch, Division of Technology and Logistics with the UN UNCTAD. Thank you so much for being with us, Jan. We were excited to be able to have you speak to us this morning. And as we go through our presentation, for the sake of time, please take us to the highlights that you deem appropriate. Thank you so much, Jan. Welcome.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome to my office in the Palais des Nations in Geneva. Very happy to participate in this. As Senator Lisa Cummings highlighted, UNCTAD will be with you in Barbados with our ministerial conference. We have quite a few projects in the Caribbean with Asicuda, Single Wind in Jamaica. We work with the Panama Canal and Forecast. We had sustainable freight transport projects in St. Lucia and Barbados. a lot of collaboration, but I must say for me personally, the most interesting and important part is that 25 to 18 years ago, when I worked in ECLAC and IMO in Latin America and the Caribbean, the parties of the the conferences of the CSA were really the highlights of the work of the Caribbean Shipping Association, the workshops and the concluding events. So happy to be here. I would have preferred in person, but let me then go through the presentation as agreed. So I will do my share screen as discussed, and you should now be seeing something on the facilitation. And I'm sharing the full screen. I hope this would now all work. Good. So you should be seeing something on the facilitation of maritime transport. I will start with three key charts, data. Some of this is new. I was jokingly yesterday in the preparation saying, I hope there are no journalists in the room because there's some data which is not yet published, but I will show three long-term trends that really highlight why trade facilitation of maritime trade and its transport is ever more important. And then we move to the pandemic, COVID-19, which really exacerbates, which makes it even more important now. And again, as Senator Cunning said this very correctly, the whole issue of digitalization, all these projects that have cost a lot of effort to implement on customs automation, on single windows, on trade information portals, now really there's no way back, we must implement it. So let me start with one chart. Actually, this data here is from the United States, but I think it very nicely illustrates a global trend. So I just updated, this is a long-term trend that shows that still in the 1980s, there was more expenditure on inventory holding in logistics in the US than on transport. So the economy would pay for warehousing, but also for depreciation, capital cost, insurance, all the cost of inventory holding. And today, the economy spends twice as much on transport than inventory holding. And this does not mean that transport is more expensive. No, transport is actually cheaper. And because it is cheaper, we buy more of it. So transport has really had so much improvements, thanks to trade facilitation, thanks to port reforms, thanks to containerization, that today things have to move. So that is one key point. Things have to move, and please don't make them wait and be stored in ports or at borders. Another chart is actually a moving chart I'm proud to share, which is another long-term trend in seaborne trade. So this is UNCTAD statistic, and you see how in the 1970s still there was more liquid cargo than dry cargo. And then you see the part that is really growing is the dry cargo that includes, of course, iron or coal and so on, but also the containerized trade, while oil is stagnant. And what is growing is other tanker cargo, including LNGs, product tankers, and so on. And I'll come back how this also links to more need for trade facilitation, trade in manufactured goods. And the third chart illustrates the participation of developing countries in global seaborne trade. This is basically imports and exports. The red bar is exports of developing countries, the goods loaded, so this is from UNCTAD port statistics, and the blue bar is unloaded, which are the imports. And you could see 1970, developing countries had a trade surplus. Does it make sense? Was it really a surplus? Well, it is actually tons. I should have made it in the legend I'm explaining to you. So this is volume, this is tons. So if you export high volumes of iron or coal, oil, and then import low volume but high value cars, manufactured goods, and so on, then actually in dollar terms, you have a trade deficit. Fast forward, latest data from our next review of maritime transport, developing countries as a group import more volumes than they export. And of course, a key point here is that it's China, this is Thailand, Vietnam, but also countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. So not everybody is there, but the trend is there. Countries, also developing countries, participate in globalized production. They import raw materials, and produce. What do these three charts have to do with trade facilitation? Let me just give you one example. Within the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, there are 12 articles, 37 measures. You can take almost any of them, but they are particularly important for manufactured goods, for new products, for globalized production, for things that have to move fast. What you see on the screen here is, I don't know whether it's a smart watch, however you call it. So when the first such product arrives at the border or at a port, and the customs officer needs to decide, is this jewelry, is this a computer, is this a toy, is this a watch? And depending on what it is, you pay different duties. So you need an advance ruling. This whole topic of the increasing need of trade facilitation, I could spend days on this, but I thought it interesting to share 3 new data series, long-term trends, the big picture, and why trade facilitation is ever more important. And this is, of course, now even more important in times of pandemic, COVID-19. So maritime transport is affected by the crisis. I will show you 3 other charts. And then I will run you very quickly afterwards through our new policy brief. Well, not that new anymore, actually. It's now 2.5, 3 months ago, but we are very proud because I think the points we highlighted there, the 10-point action plan, have shown to be very relevant to get through the crisis. Hard data on seaborne trades, on ship calls. This is data from marine traffic. So you see how the straight red line shows you where we were last year, and then you compare it with weekly data compared to last year. The brown line, the one that really goes down, are passenger ships, including cruise ships, which we learned and we know is particularly important for the Caribbean. They were hit first and hardest. They are now slowly coming back. Passenger ships, global port calls per week. Containers went really down, especially at the beginning in China, and they then came back. And what has now come down, this is up to mid-June here, weekly data, end of June. So you see how the oil is now going down. If you want to look at the same data for each and every country, here's a little video. You can see 3 things here. You can see the relative size for containers in this case, the importance of a country for container ship calls, the number of ships that arrive per week. So China is the most important country here. You see how the bubbles go smaller or bigger. That's the weekly change. And the color tells you, is it more or less than last year? So if we start the movie beginning of this year compared to last year, you see how many Caribbean countries were green. There was an improvement over previous year. China started green, then came red, got red very quickly. But then China, which is the most important in terms of container ships arrivals and departures, also became green again. So you see at the bottom, there's this week of 27 April, 4 May, 11 May. And then you see how Europe, especially Italy, Spain, they turned really red, meaning worse than last year. And this is the latest picture. Another picture that shows the change pre-COVID, after COVID. The blue is the fleet deployment of key economies in different corners of the world. So the first quarter of 2020 was still above last year's first quarter. And for most countries, the second quarter went down. And even where it did not go down, on average, it depends, and you can see, if we had more time, different countries moving differently. So that is maritime transport affected by the crisis. Now, let me go very quickly through our 10-point action plan. We go from the left to the right, from the ships to the ports, to leaving the ports, to transit, to customs, to information, and so on. So we go from left to right. The seafarer issue, the seafarers are critical personnel. We highlighted this already very early on, and by now I think everybody said it. We was very pleased to learn that Barbados is proactively helping with the change of crews. A key point is this on the sea side. Of course, the ports have to remain open. We have a technical note with very specific technical suggestions, best practices of how can ports remain open and still protect their populations and the workers. You may have specifically trade facilitation measures for fast track critical goods. and in general facilitate also cross-border transport, the trucks, the trains. Each one of them, one could go into more detail, but I think it's just go through from the port, cross-border transit, not so important in the Caribbean, very important for our landlocked member countries, especially in the middle of Africa and Asia, Paraguay, Bolivia as well. They are really, really worried that it's not only the issue in the port, but also then transit trucks are stuck at the border. All this requires transparency. This is changing daily. So we have in a number of countries, we have trade information portals that are updated from here, from Geneva, on the distance, to make sure that traders know at every moment what are the latest rules, regulations for goods and transport workers. All this is to go paperless. I will come back to this in the middle because this is really key. Go paperless meaning no touching papers, no stamps, the whole social distancing is supported by paperless. There are some legal implications, of course, and I think these, I'm not a lawyer, I'm the economist, but I think a good case can be made that governments can support companies, providers and users of transport services to really, not to go bankrupt because they can't comply with their contracts, with their obligations. There's a case we made to protect shippers, the users, and the service providers as critical businesses, especially, of course, for small island states that really, really depend on the transport industry, and all this requires technical assistance. So from the ships to the port, to the transit, to the customs, to the trade information portals, we provide a number of technical assistance programs to support our members in this. And actually, me personally and my team, we have had much more work over the last 4 months, 5 months than we have in a normal year, and we always have a lot of work. One last key message. You may have seen pictures, PowerPoints, people showing a balance, and I always get up and get angry. It's not a balance. There's not a single measure in the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. There's not a single measure in our policy brief that says you should not control. Yes, we need to control, and all the specific measures that we are promoting, they actually help both. So I come back to my policy brief on the digitalization. A lot of these measures, and these are photos from Hoffman's travels in the wider Caribbean, so from some of them are 25 years ago almost. So all these reform processes have been helped, and they really help both. It is not to control. We want to control better, to have more information, to have more transparency, to have more pre-arrival processing and so on, to achieve both the trade facilitation and the protection of our population. And here are some links for further information, and that concludes my short PowerPoint. Happy to share more or to answer questions and discussions.
Thank you. Thank you again, Jan. This has been such a fascinating journey for us, but I'm sure we have attendees in our audience who are trying to understand the importance of this conversation, the timeliness of it. And I couldn't help but note that on one of your slides, you made reference to the importance of the digitalization of the marine transport to enhance growth and development in this industry. And I think it falls right in line with the conversation that we're going to now have with Secretary General Bernadette Lewis from the Telecommunications Union. And I think the hope is, as we talk about the consensus building at the end of this conversation, is that these trends and emerging practices in the digitalization, what are the implications for the Caribbean, and how do we speed that or advance that, as we said earlier, adapt. So it is indeed my pleasure to introduce Secretary General Bernadette Lewis and to have her share with us her thoughts about how do we do that and make it fast in terms of the digitization process. Thank you, welcome. I think we need to unmute.
Right. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk a bit about 21st century government and the efforts, the trends in digitization and the implications for the Caribbean. Right, I have some slides which I am going to share at this time.
Yes.
Right, yes, good, I think I'm up and running. And the place that I really need to start is with the Caribbean, the CARICOM single market and economy. And it is really about trade and facilitating the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital. But for this to happen, the free movement of the people, goods, service, and capital, of course, it's going to be underpinned by those physical transport systems that we've been talking about, and also information transport systems. And as you know, and as Jan just said, the manual paper processes are inefficient. They do not work for us. And digitization is a must. It is an imperative for the region going forward.
Madam Secretary General, please pardon me, we're not seeing your slides.
Oh.
We were seeing them earlier. My apologies.
Yes, I am sorry. I thought I should screen. Here we go. Yes. Sharing. Are you seeing them now? Hello?
Yes, we're seeing you now.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we're seeing your screen.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Right. So the manual processes, as I said, are inefficient. They will not serve us in the 21st century. Digitization is an absolute must. And therefore, so the CARICOM single market and economy, it requires these transport systems. And in 2017, the need for digitization was expressed in a document entitled A Vision and Roadmap for the CARICOM single ICT space. And it was envisioned, the vision in that document was that there would be a single ICT space which would provide the digital layer for the CARICOM single market and economy. That document was approved by the CARICOM heads of government in 2017, in February of 2017. And there are four components to the CARICOM single ICT space. Of course, regionally harmonized policy, legislation, and regulations, a robust broadband infrastructure, common frameworks for governments, the private sector, and civil society, and also the governance, security, and management systems that would look after the operations of that single ICT space. But we're going to focus in this presentation on the common frameworks, and more specifically on the common frameworks for government, which brings us to what we call 21st century government. A 21st century government is one that is citizen-centric, it is seamless, it is resilient, it makes effective use of 21st century technology, which we call information and communication technologies, and it is fit for purpose in the 21st century. So I'm going to be focusing a little on that, but I need to backtrack a bit and talk about traditional government and its citizens. And the government has a unique relationship with its citizens in that it is the only institution with which a citizen must interact every step of their lives, from birth to immunization to education, right through the whole cycle of life until death takes us from that world. And the difficulty is, because of our inherited government, which is based on paper, manual processes, the information for a citizen and a client and a business and all its interactions with government, that information is distributed across government ministries, departments, agencies, and to do a single transaction with the government. It may require the citizen or business or private sector organization to visit several ministries to collect his own information to take to a ministry or department to conclude a transaction. Highly inefficient. And what we are proposing is that we move to 21st century government. 21st century government, which is one that is digitized and optimized to make effective use of information and communication technologies. And it starts with the unification of all the government networks that you have all over the place, because at the end of the day, you want one IP-based government-wide area network, and then the integration of information that is distributed across all governments, so that you're making the availability of information about citizens and private sector organizations, businesses, it is available across governments, of course, with the necessary security systems that need to accompany this. And we're looking for streamlined processes, consistent input and delivery channels. And in this way, you build up an efficient, effective service delivery across all of the government. If you do it correctly, it will be efficient, it will be effective, faster, smarter, cheaper, transparent, resilient, predictable, so that it doesn't matter who you may meet up at any point in time, the message, the service is going to be the same. And the services are available, as I mentioned, across multiple delivery channels. It's not an 8 in the morning to 4 in the evening service. It is 24/7 across 365 days a year. So this is what we're aiming for. And many governments have actually started this process. They're well ahead. They're well ahead in the digitization game. But unfortunately, in many cases, the digitization has remained on the basis of a ministry or a government agency or department. It has not moved to this unified, seamless, integrated environment. But I think we are rejoicing. One of the good things about COVID-19 is that you have the realization now that this is an imperative. We cannot afford to be creating e-government services on a per ministry basis. It has to be a whole of government approach at which the citizen and the government's clients and stakeholders are at the center of all that we do. So I think the realization has come about, and the government certainly recognize the need to accelerate their move to 21st century government. And one of the things that are very important in the whole issue of 21st century government is this whole issue of a unique electronic identifier that uniquely identifies the citizen and all of his transactions and interactions with the government. So it does not matter which ministry you go to. Once you present your electronic unique identifier, all of the transactions, all of your information is available. You do not need to go from ministry to ministry to ministry to department and so on. All of this is part of the whole digitization process. A number of countries have expressed moving towards this unique electronic identifier. So this is happening, but a lot more work has to be done to accelerate this process. And I want to say something very specifically, that digitization isn't just taking the process you have and computerizing it or making it digital. It is about reimagining the service. and what is really necessary, and what is relevant, and what the customer, what the citizen actually needs. Reimagining what the needs of the citizens and businesses are, and developing the service, leveraging the power of the technology to deliver something that is meaningful. And I think a classic example is of this time is the whole, you know, the issue in the Barbados welcome stamp. So you have a different kind of tourism now. Yes, you don't have to, you know, it's not necessarily for the sun, sea, and sand, but it's people who feel safe coming to Barbados and who have the technology available to them to work from wherever they are in the world. That is the new world we live in. The world has changed, as I think the senator said, the world has changed forever. There's no going back, absolutely no going back. And we have to use our creativity to reimagine what is necessary, what is appropriate, what is relevant for us at this time. And but this, it requires inspired leadership. It starts with leadership. There must be that commitment to the vision. And I mentioned we have a vision and roadmap for the CARICOM single ICT space to provide that digital layer for the Caribbean's single market and economy. The political will. You know, we're in the Caribbean, we talk a lot, but we have to have that will to move this agenda forward, not just move it forward, but to accelerate it. And of course, the allocation of financial and human resources, it is resources, not resources. And yes, too, it is resources. It is allocation of the financial and human resources to do it. You cannot, in my view, approve a vision and roadmap to introduce the CARICOM single ICT space, the digital layer for the single market and economy, and don't put any money behind it, and do not provide the budget at the national levels to make these things happen. Then we, of course, we have to focus, as I said, on the citizens and our clients, and do that reimagining of what the services that are really necessary are about. This requires intergovernmental collaboration. We cannot achieve the CARICOM single ICT space without our governments communicating, collaborating, moving in the same direction, joint procurement to minimize costs. You know, the major ICT technology houses, they talk about their cities, smart cities. And what is a city? How big is a city? Oh, 10 million people. You understand why we have to collaborate and cooperate on this as a region. And of course, we also, as I mentioned, the whole issue of the legislation and the length of time it takes to enact legislation. We have to have a harmonized policy, legislative, and regulatory environment for these things to work. Of course, I'm talking about using the technology of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. Many governments are struggling with the technology of the third industrial revolution. We'll never catch up. What we have to do is leapfrog and take advantage of the technologies that are appropriate and relevant and current at this point in time. And of course, the whole issue of this acceleration of the 21st century government agenda. And then we will realize that really free movement of the people, goods, services, capital, and the rights of establishment in a CARICOM single market and economy. So the digitization requires inspired leadership. And with that, I end. I thank you all. Thank you to the WiMAC and of course the Caribbean Shipping Association. Jennifer, thank you. It's been a joy participating. And, you know, I hope these few thoughts, you know, get our stakeholders. This is within our reach. We can do it. COVID-19 has proven it. Let's get on with it. Our theme for the CGU's team for the 2020s is digital transformation. Let's do it. It can be done. I thank you.
I thank you. I will say that what some of the comments that are being monitored, someone sent out a quick note. I am so inspired by this discussion. One of our managers in one of our countries, Port Authority, and that is so encouraging because I think this takes us to our final presenter to talk about the human element, the human side of what all the human resources, the managing of the collaboration, and as we talked about the fourth industrial revolution for the Caribbean. It is indeed an honor to have Chris Trelawney, the Acting Director, Technical Cooperation within the IMO, who has been an incredible partner to our organization, and we're so honored to be able to have him speak to us about the essential pre-considerations in planning a sustainable response. Chris, welcome, and where in the world are you? Over to you, Chris. Chris?
Well, thank you very much for that cheerful welcome. I'm sitting looking out of my window at Windsor Castle in London, and for a change I can actually... Can you hear me?
You were breaking up a bit, but go ahead, we can hear you now.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to try and share my screen with you.
Please do.
I have a... Let's see if this works. Okay, are you with me now?
Yes.
Okay, what I would like to briefly talk about, as you've mentioned, is the human element side of this, very important part of it. But first of all, I'd like to echo what all the previous speakers have said, particularly in terms of the need for efficient trade facilitation, the need for electronic information exchange, and so on. Because really, like everything else, the COVID response and recovery requires a multi-agency, multidisciplinary and whole of government approach. It's not a single departmental response. Now this goes for COVID, and what has been highlighted from the COVID response is that things need to be done quickly and things are possible, but it's also important for addressing other threats. And we saw some fairly graphic examples in earlier presentations on, for example, natural disasters, and also opportunities, the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're moving quickly on COVID because we have to, but actually a lot of what we're doing for COVID, we should be doing as part of the natural economic development and sustainability, because as you've already pointed out, the maritime sector underpins economic development, and it's absolutely critical for addressing and for recovering from the pandemic. Some of the statistics that have been, my previous speakers have brought out, 80% of your food is going by sea. Tourism, 74% down. The import-export by ship is absolutely critical, not only to your region, but also to the world. And what's making that move is seafarers and port workers. And there is a very, very strong case for them to be treated as key workers and assisted accordingly. It's an old saying that seafarers are the unsung heroes of an unseen industry. Nobody actually knows that they're there until they're not there. And the challenge at the moment is that in the normal state of play, about 150,000 seafarers per month would be moving to or from ships, because they are limited in their contracts and by law, the Maritime Labour Convention, as to how long they can serve at sea. It's a safety issue. Now, currently, we've got a backlog of about 600,000 seafarers who cannot either get to their ships or get home. And so on a lot of ships, the contract normally runs between 4 to 11 months, which is the maximum allowed. Some of them have been at sea for well over a year. And this is leading to mental health issues, to safety issues. And a beautiful region like the Caribbean is very vulnerable to accidents, maritime emergencies, and shipping as well. That could equally affect your tourism area. So the whole situation is becoming a major safety issue as seafarers are exhausted physically and mentally. So what we're trying to promote is whole of government action to address these particular issues. Now, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, and I'll try and keep it short, www.imo.org. This is the IMO's website. And if you go into the opening page, I put a helpful little yellow arrow there for you, and click on COVID-19 information resources, that will give you a large amount of useful information. There's the general background as to what we're doing, what's been happening, and so on. And then there is specific advice for IMO member states, be they port states or states supplying seafarers, to the seafarers themselves, to the shipping industry. And these are pushed out under the cover of we go in for cheerful names in IMO, circular letter number 4204, of which there are now 23 versions, or 23 editions. The first one came out very early this year, the latest one the beginning of this month, and they are all available on that website to download, and they provide a lot of useful information. There are also links to other organizations. Some of the UNCTAD advice, for example, you can get from there, and also the World Health Organization advice as well. So it's a really useful resource for all government departments to go and have a look at. And I've copied on the bottom the direct link into it as well. And these slides will be available to anybody who wants them. It's nothing to do. So looking at those circular letters, they list a number of different issues. So health measures, how can seafarers, how can port workers ensure their own health, and preventive measures they can take. And I received one of the questions today is in relation to cruise shipping, how you make those more safe. Clearly there are concerns with cruise ships about ventilation systems and circulating air. Until those issues are addressed and visibly addressed, people are going to be reluctant to go on cruise ships, and that is going to impact the Caribbean economy for years to come. So there is guidance in those circular letters on issues such as that. There's practical guidance on how to respond to outbreaks on board, how to contain them, what to do. Now, clearly, the facilitation of trade is a major issue, and we work very closely with our partners in UNCTAD and other World Customs Organization, other agencies to deal with that. Another issue is the extension of seafarer certificates. Seafarers are allowed to work for a particular period of time, or ships are allowed to work for a particular period of time before they need to have their certification updated. And so you're running then, if people are operating without certification, you're running into all sorts of liability issues as well as just the safety issues themselves. So there's guidance on that. There's guidance on port state control, how to conduct the port state control inspections to make sure ships are safe to continue trading. But the big issue at the moment is, as I mentioned, the repatriation of seafarers and crew changes. And how do we facilitate those? Because if the crews can't get on and off the ships, eventually the ships will cease to trade. And in a region like the Caribbean, that is a major, major issue. And so we are encouraging governments to treat seafarers, port workers to and from ships and home. And so a lot of work is going on there. We're also providing additional encouragement to governments. The Secretary General is particularly active in talking to them directly and getting the message there. So the advocacy side, if you like, because without the seafarers, the global trade will cease to exist. It's very simple. No shipping, no shopping. Simple as that. And then the most recent one relates to the UK's International Maritime Summit on seafarers, crew change, and the recommendations coming out of that. So within that database, then the 23 circular letters, an awful lot of very, very useful there. In addition to providing that guidance, we're also working actively to raise the profile of the issue, to work with our member states to encourage them to take action, but also working with UN headquarters and other United Nations and international organizations, including membership of the UN Crisis Management Team. Our development partners include people like the World Health Organization, the International Labour Organization. We've cooperated with the International Civil Aviation Organization in terms of crew changing and key worker stuff. UNCTAD, you've already had Jan's excellent presentation, so clearly we work closely with them. International Office on Migration, World Customs Organization, lots of others. But also very, very importantly, is the relationship with the shipping industry itself. The organizations like the International Chamber of Shipping, BIMCO, the ship operators, but also the regional organizations, Caribbean Shipping, and so on, to get these messages out. Addressing those crew change issues, we've established a Seafarer Crisis Action Team, which is promoting all of this and responding to the latest changes. But as I mentioned before, the bilateral approaches are also very important, where the Secretary General himself is talking to senior government officials to promote that that approach. So that's a very quick run through on what IMO is doing, and I would welcome any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, very much, Chris. I think you have really brought us to where I believe all that's been said by our panelists is so relevant, so connected. The idea of collaboration, whole of government, Senator Lisa Cummins' policy direction that needs to be thought forward. The examples that were shared by Secretary General Bernadette Lewis with regards to how we digitize what we're doing using technology to leapfrog. Barbados is a classic example with its effort and its initiative towards encouraging people come to Barbados for a year. That, I think, was the great example of what I heard when Diane talked about how do we diversify the tourism sector. As a reminder, there is a poll. We'd like you to respond to the poll. Which topics would you like to learn more about? We're seeing comments that said this is great, discussions that were necessary. So please do the poll, respond. It certainly helps us at WiMAC and CSA as we collaborate in getting the presentations that we have discussed. So what I'd like to do very quickly, we've got just a few more minutes. We are scheduled to wrap up just about 11:30, but our chair has, our president has indicated that we can just let it flow. And this is the portion of the discussion where if there were questions that were posed directly to you, our panelists, you can feel comfortable in responding. But I think to do the consensus building and to ask each of you to respond, starting certainly with you, Senator Cummins, when you shared the way forward in terms of the political will, the examples that Barbados has put in place, what would you, in a word or in a statement, suggest as part of this consensus building for the Caribbean-wide, would you like to put forward in this regard? Senator Cummins, please.
Thank you very much for that. I probably would use a single word: visioning. And the reason I would use that word is that, you know, sometimes in the course of our conversation, we're great at identifying the challenges, we're great at identifying what the problems are, what the obstacles are, and we're great at doing the operational things. And those are all important elements that are part of our consensus building and as part of the discussion. But where do we go once we've identified those things? And visioning the way forward is very much going to be the key thing that helps us to transition and to build resilience. And so that would be my word, visioning, and that will be the platform on which we do everything else.
Excellent. Visioning. Secretary General Bernadette Lewis, you talked about the vision and the leapfrogging. How do we take the vision and put it in perspective for how you see? And by the way, there was two terminologies that came up both in Diane's presentation, and then there was a comment with regards to broadband, the availability of the broadband for the region in order to leapfrog and to take the vision that the good senator has just shared. Bernadette?
One of the things that we have recognized across the region, there is the need for champions at the highest level of government. There needs to be a communication plan that articulates where we want to go. And it's not just in the public service, it is for all citizens, for the private sector, for civil society. That champion, and it's necessary when you look at it from you're now moving from where you have perhaps line ministries and government ministers, and you need someone, an ICT minister, for example, can't necessarily tell his counterpart, you need to do this, or let's do this, or there's interministerial rivalry, there could be. So you need that champion to say, this is the direction we're taking, this is where it's going. It calls for interministerial cooperation, yes? Yeah, and the commitment of those strategic plans that are based on national priorities. Yes, what are the priorities? Is it that we need to collect more tax revenues? And then, of course, the whole issue of the physical broadband infrastructure, the unification of all those little bits and pieces of diverse networks that you have, and then consideration of what are the services that are going to be meaningful, that are necessary, that are needed by our citizens. Yes, and then you look at the technology, the offerings, and how you could now leverage the potential of those technologies to deliver your services. Now, I just want to make one quick point. The whole issue of leapfrogging. Many of our governments have not mastered or leveraged the technologies of the third industrial revolution. Yes, we're still talking about e-government. still after 25 years. And we have a whole new suite. There's no catching up because the world has moved ahead.
Yes.
So it is important now that we embrace what's currently available and move with it. But technology costs. There's a cost associated with it. How are we going to manage those costs? Is every country going to go off and acquire the technology and pay top dollar? Or can we move together and do joint procurements and have regional systems that exchange information in a meaningful way? And you could minimize your costs. There are economies of scale to be achieved if we could work together. But then it goes back to that issue of collaboration. None of this will work if our governments do not talk to each other and have a joint approach to the legislation, to the policy, to the regulations. It isn't going to work. Yes?
Well said.
That's
well
my
said. Well said. Well, I think the caution, the flag that you raised, the champions are necessary. And I think when Diane talked about the economic aspect of this conversation, without the champions and without government recognizing that with small economies, we are going to have to collaborate. We're going to have to figure out how to do this. So I'd like, Diane, for you to give us that one word or sentence and just consensus building from your perspective. Over to you, unmute.
Thank you. It has been such a rich discussion this morning. I am so very pleased to have been here. I think that, you know, just reflecting on the angst in the region over the issue of the dissolution of LIAT, you know, really for me punctuated the importance of a single market and economy, of regionalism, of integration, the importance of us finding a solution together in order to get out of, to survive this challenge. And you know, I've been monitoring a lot of the discussions happening within CARICOM in respect of pooling resources for how we get medical supplies and food and so on that responds to the needs of all, because everybody individually has had their challenges sourcing the resources that they needed to respond to COVID. But in terms of post-COVID and how we take ourselves forward, it has to be about resilience building. And our watchword for resilience building has to be diversification. So we need to be speaking about diversification for resilience building. And I think that Senator Cummins had mentioned that right at the start. We need to look at how we diversify the tourism economy. You know, we have been encouraging the countries to invite nationals to take their vacations at home, in order to, instead of depending entirely on external visitors for our tourism industry, let's build a local tourism industry, and let's find different niches in tourism. We have such a rich creative industry. Let us find ways to diversify the economy that are more COVID proof. We need to be looking at that in order to ensure that ultimately we have the resource, because ultimately we need funds, we need resources in order to survive. Yes. So it has to be about diversification of our economies in order to build that resilience that we need, to invest in green industries, in blue economy, in order to ensure that we are stronger together.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Diane. And so I left these two gentlemen for, well, ladies first, of course. They're fine gentlemen, so I know that. But I believe that what you know, Jan and Chris, put out there as it relates to the industry, the shipping and trading industry. And what I would ask is the same consensus building idea, but I'd like to begin with Chris and then end with Jan, because there's a mixed bag of opportunities that goes along with the challenges that we're talking about, resiliency and sustainability. And I so appreciate when Chris said, no shipping, no shopping. And I'm always excited and grateful because that's the industry we're in. So what is in your takeaway from hearing all three of our earlier presenters' consensus idea? Please tell me from your perspective, Chris, what do you say? What is that one thing we must do urgently?
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it really is down to that, the whole of government approach and the looking at maritime as the enabler for sustainable development. So be that the maritime sector, maritime trade through ports, through shipping, through imports, through exports, but also the whole wider blue economy, the whole tourist industry, the shipping, the sustainable fishing, the sustainable exploitation of resources. They all require a whole of government approach. And it then becomes a factor of investing in that, so as a commercial opportunity. One of the challenges that I face, certainly not so much in your region, but in sorry, I've lost you there, is the need for aid. And I keep saying we don't really actually need aid. What we're looking at here is a commercial investment. And so getting a maritime strategy, how am I going to use the maritime sector? How am I going to invest in that and develop it? So all the stuff that Jan's been talking about, the facilitation, the making it easier to trade, is absolutely critical. And that requires lots of different government departments to actually work together. So that's my key area, is promoting that interagency cooperation. But don't forget the seafarers that actually make it all possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. And with that, let me say to you, Jan, you are the guru and our expert in the whole idea of trade and logistics, and you've seen it in the Caribbean. You've been a great friend to the Caribbean Shipping Association over the years. What is that consensus building hearing? And just bring it all together for us as we get ready to wrap up. I think there are one or two questions that we may want to entertain. Jan, take us there, please.
Yeah, no, it was really great and a good collaboration. Maybe one little story to show how all these is interlinked on the national level, where we are also supporting the NTFCs, the National Trade Station Committees, which should very much be associated, collaborate, or be the same as the IMO FAL committee. So that's on the national level. On the international level, we work with ECLA. We have this joint development account project, Diana knows, and we will soon be happy to receive one of your staff as one of our P2 joining the transport team. So we are hoping we get him very soon. and with IMO, we had this joint call. So this little concrete story is that in this policy brief that I shared with you, I went from the ships to the port, to the customs, to the transit. And in the specific technical note for the ports, in our first version that was published online, we are proud of it, there was one sentence that basically said, I'm embarrassed to say so now, but it said, paraphrasing, "Dear ports, please be careful, don't let the seafarers leave the ship." So that's of course totally contradictory to what we then, the call for the critical transport workers and so on. So we got next day, I get a call from the ICS, Chamber of Shipping in London. Say, "Jan, what is this about?" Embarrassing, so I spoke to the colleague. We took it out. You know? But that just shows, as an example, this is a complex issue along the supply chain, along all the stakeholders. And I think the Caribbean Shipping Association and the different owners of this really very important event just shows that it brings together the stakeholders in the national and international, and yeah, it was really, really great to have all of us together, I believe.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to take two questions, the privilege of being the moderator today for the benefit of the audience. There's quite a bit of questions and some very, very important one. There was a great example, the highest degree of regional cooperation ever achieved was because of cricket. Customs, immigration, visa, etc. Do you think COVID provides the inspiration for our leaders like cricket did when we came together to collaborate and we had one single space? May I ask, I don't know who's familiar with what happened back then.
I'd like to answer, Jennifer.
Senator, please do.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and it's timely because one of the discussions that we have been having across the region, certainly as it relates to the reopening of the countries and border openings to tourism, has been the treatment of the Cricket World Cup and the single space for entry, where we were able to ensure that border officials had a coordinated approach to management, and that once you were able to enter the region from one country, that border officials were trusted using a set of agreed to parameters to have ensured that travelers met those minimum requirements and free circulation was envisioned. Certainly as it relates to tourism, specifically cruise tourism, that is very much a model that is on the lips of all of the policymakers at this point. The Cricket World Cup model, which allows us to agree to the travel bubble that we referred to earlier, and someone asked a question about that as well, so where we are able to have maritime declarations of health submitted by the various cruise lines in particular, reviewed in real time at intervals by the medical officials. We're expecting to receive those maritime declarations of health 48 hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, 6 hours, and then 1 hour prior to a ship arriving in Barbados in each of our countries, for example, because it means that there is an itinerary. And that means that there are 5 or 6 or more countries that are on the same itinerary for these vessels. And so once you have landed in one country, you have to have met the requirements as outlined for that travel bubble. And that travel bubble is very much being defined using the same principles as the Cricket World Cup, the principles for free circulation. And I think it's a great way for us to look at how we're able to have that coordination, the utilization of technology and digitization where information is shared simultaneously across the region, not just for goods, but for the movement of people throughout the Caribbean region. Certainly in the Anglophone Caribbean, that is a part of the CARICOM region, that is very much the thinking.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. There is another question that I would put forward. And I think, Diane, you can respond to this. How does CARICOM address the balance between government service delivery, efficiency, and citizens' privacy concern? And I believe, Bernadette, you may want to comment on that. How does CARICOM address the balance?
Right, thank you very much. The issue at this point in time, within the vision and roadmap for the CARICOM single ICT space, there are provisions for the whole issue of privacy of information and, of course, security. There are a number of initiatives that are happening at this point in time. Coming out of it, we have a CARICOM cybersecurity and cybercrime action plan that addresses some of these concerns. So there is at the level of CARICOM an approved document that addresses the issues of privacy and so on. But I think in the formulation of government policies, there is an absolute need for consultation, because at the end of the day, as societies, as Caribbean societies, we need to determine what is right for us and what we want, so that there is a need for greater degrees of consultation. First of all, public awareness. Awareness is critical of the issues that are unfolding and are emerging, because we are in brand new territory and the world is changing at a phenomenal pace. So there's a need for a lot of public awareness and education and consultation as a people, not just at the national and the regional level. What we expect, what we want, what are our aspirations, what we are prepared to compromise on, and what we're not prepared to compromise on. A quick example in terms of Internet of Things. We were suggesting, you know, perhaps we needed to give children wearables so that if they do not show up in school, it's an automatic response. And in some countries, people were up in arms. How, you know, why would you want to do this? But then kidnapping is an issue in some countries, you know, and Internet of Things and IoT solution would be the right thing. So there needs to be these consultations and discussions on how we view ourselves as Caribbean people and what to say what we want and what we need. Yes. And that is it. So there are programs to deal with that balance of the privacy and so on. But I think there's a lot more room for discussion.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Diane, do you want to make a comment on that? No, you're good. Chris? I think Chris is a little freeze. All right. So there are multiple questions in our chat box, in our Q&A. For the sake of time and to really afford you to grab some lunch wherever you are, breakfast in some places, I'm going to quickly consolidate a question that, as it relates to the whole of government, that the problem is we lack will. The legislative framework where all governments become integrated into one government, and that if there are no champions until we all recognize all citizens are part of this whole government regime. There was also a question with regards to a comment regarding that same point. Again, regional individualism shades our hope. Well, I will say it is for those purposes that we believe the webinar series that the women that in Maritime Administration Caribbean, WiMAC, CSA, our Caribbean Shipping Association, IMO, our partner, and all of the organizations that has really made this such a successful dynamic conversation. We have members from all over the Caribbean in WiMAC that are participating. I saw Berthiud Azil, who raised a question, you know, what advice can be given to governments or the relevant authorities as it relates to the fact that, you know, crew dissatisfaction. We will address that, Berthiud, in our next webinar series. But please allow me to close. We are almost over the time that we allotted for this. Allow me to thank our chairman of the CSA. He has been a friend and open gentleman to this effort. Mr. JC, I thank you, Juan Carlos Croston, for your leadership at the CSA. I think you have embraced the fourth industrialized revolution that Secretary General Bernadette Lewis has brought forward, and that's necessary. I thank you for your openness. I thank Colin Young for his amazing leadership in the Caribbean on behalf of representing IMO. He's always been there for WiMAC, and I know that years ago he's always wanted to achieve something like this. I think we may have made a dent in that regard. Sharice Arman, Attorney Sharice Arman in the Caymans, my WISTA sister and my WiMAC sister, thank you for allowing your law firm to have been such a generous partner and supporter of this webinar. Certainly Jody Barrow, Joanne Edwards of Trinidad and Tobago's Shipping Association, your leadership, of course, goes unsaid. Claudia Grant in Jamaica, former chair, president of WiMAC, thank you very, very much for your continued hard work and leadership in this regard. And of course, our president, Dwynette Eversley, thank you, ma'am. At the end of the day, we couldn't have done this without the platform that CSA has allowed for us to take. And so Malika, I want to thank you in your new role at WiMAC and CSA for the effort that you put forward in making this technology so easy. And most critically, equally as important, the amazing thought leaders today. Thank you, Diane. Thank you so much for your leadership and your continued work in this area. Senator Cummings, you are my shero. I am so proud of you, and I watch you, and I see big things ahead. Thank you for your openness. Chris and Jan, thank you. Madame Bernadette Lewis, thank you. Your voice has never been quiet. You've been that silent pusher. I really, really thank you so much for your leadership and what you've done. And I hope that as we get to the true 21st century government, that one day you will be able to pivot yourself anywhere in the world that you want and help us all to remember that the Caribbean and the space of trade and facilitation can be done because all of us own this issue. And without the maritime sector, without shipping and trading, there can be no economic development. So I thank you all. And with that, I bid you adieu. Have a wonderful day. Farewell. Stay safe. Wash your hands 20 seconds. And all be well. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our participants, by the way, our participants and audience outside in the world, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bonjour.
Great.
Bonjour.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.